John Walker never drank whiskey. Not once. The man who created what would become Johnnie Walker, a brand now worth billions and sold in almost every country on earth, refused to touch alcohol his entire life. In a Scotland drowning in whiskey culture, that made him an outsider before he even began. But while other men drank, John studied. While distillers trusted tradition, he became obsessed with something far more dangerous: consistency. And that obsession would turn a poor orphan from rural Scotland into the founder of the most recognizable whiskey empire in history. What makes this story unbelievable is not just the money or the global fame, it is how close everything came to collapsing before the brand ever existed. A dead father, a failing future, a grocery shop bought with desperation money. Then came the floods, the financial pressure, the ridicule, and the gamble that could have destroyed the Walker family forever. Yet somehow, the boy nobody expected to survive changed an entire industry without ever tasting the product that made him famous. If you're into real stories of power, money, and transformation, subscribe, because this story starts in the muddy farmland of Scotland long before the world ever heard the name Johnnie Walker. 1. The orphan who inherited nothing but pressure. John Walker was born in 1805 near the small Scottish town of Kilmarnock, into a world where survival depended on weather, harvests, and luck. His father worked brutal hours on a farm that barely provided stability, and nobody looking at the Walker family would have imagined global success waiting in their future. But even as a child, John noticed things other boys ignored. He watched negotiations at local markets. He studied how traders spoke, how customers reacted, how prices shifted depending on emotion as much as quality. Long before he understood business, he understood patterns. Then, everything collapsed. In 1819, his father died suddenly, leaving John orphaned at just 14 years old. The family farm was sold off, piece by piece, until only £417 remained. For most families, that money would have disappeared into survival. But the trustees made a shocking decision. They used it to buy a grocery and spirits shop in John's name. The risk was enormous. He was a teenager competing against experienced businessmen in a growing industrial town. One mistake could destroy everything. But what happened next would define the future of whiskey forever. 2. The tea blending obsession that changed whiskey forever. The strange thing about John Walker was that he hated alcohol. In 19th century Scotland, refusing to drink was almost suspicious. Whiskey was everywhere in homes, taverns, celebrations, and business deals. Yet John never touched a drop. Instead, he became obsessed with tea. His shop sold teas imported from China and India, and customers demanded something difficult: consistency. One shipment might taste strong and smoky, while another tasted weak and floral. Most merchants accepted the inconsistency. John refused to. So he started blending teas together, carefully balancing aromas and characteristics until customers got the same flavor every single time. And that is where the breakthrough happened. John realized whiskey had the exact same problem tea did. Scotch in the early 1800s was wildly inconsistent. One barrel could taste smooth and rich, while the next tasted harsh and nearly undrinkable. Customers were gambling every time they bought a bottle. But there was a problem. Distillers treated whiskey blending almost like sacrilege. Mixing different whiskeys together was seen as ruining tradition. John did not care about tradition. He cared about what customers actually wanted. 3. The dangerous experiment nobody believed would work. John began experimenting quietly inside his shop, blending different Scotch whiskies the same way he blended tea. He relied entirely on smell because he still refused to drink. That made the entire process seem absurd. Imagine trying to build a perfume empire without smelling perfume. Yet somehow, his nose became legendary. Customers started returning with the same reaction. Walker's blends tasted smoother, more balanced, and more reliable than anything else they had tried before. Then came the moment that changed the industry. In 1823, the British government passed the Excise Act. reducing crushing taxes that had made legal whiskey production nearly impossible. Suddenly, distilleries exploded across Scotland, flooding the market with more whiskey than ever before. Most merchants saw chaos. John Walker saw opportunity. He started sourcing whiskies from different regions and blending them into something revolutionary, a product customers could trust every single time. The world was not ready for it yet, but John had already discovered the future of Scotch whiskey decades before his competitors understood what was happening. 4. The flood that nearly destroyed everything. By the 1850s, John Walker's reputation had spread far beyond Kilmarnock. Customers travelled from neighbouring towns specifically to buy his blends. He had transformed a struggling grocery shop into a respected local business. Then disaster struck without warning. In 1852, violent storms triggered catastrophic flooding near Kilmarnock. Water exploded through the streets and tore directly into Walker's shop, destroying inventory, supplies, barrels, furniture, everything. At 47 years old, John stood inside the wreckage, watching decades of work disappear in a single day. Many businesses never recovered from that flood. Some owners simply gave up. And, honestly, nobody would have blamed him if he had done the same. But that is when the deeper truth behind his success became obvious. John Walker was never building a whiskey business. He was building systems, discipline, and trust. Within 2 years, he rebuilt the company from scratch. And during that recovery, his son Alexander began stepping into the business with ideas that would eventually transform the family name into a global empire. 5. From small Scottish shop to global power. Alexander Walker understood something his father never fully pursued: branding. Railways were expanding across Britain. Global shipping routes connected Europe to India, Australia, Africa, and the Americas. The world was becoming smaller, and Alexander realized whiskey could travel with it. After John's death in 1857, Alexander pushed aggressively into expansion. He introduced the now famous square bottle because it survived shipping better than round ones. Then came the slanted label, angled upward to stand out instantly on crowded shelves. Tiny design decisions became massive competitive advantages. What happened next changed everything. By the early 1900s, the company officially became Johnnie Walker, complete with the iconic Striding Man logo and color-coded labels like Red Label and Black Label. The brand spread across the British Empire with incredible speed, eventually reaching more than 100 countries. Today, Johnnie Walker sells hundreds of millions of bottles every year and generates billions in revenue. But the strangest part of the story never changed. The greatest whiskey empire on earth was created by a man who never drank whiskey at all. John Walker's real genius was not alcohol, it was understanding people. He understood that customers cared less about tradition than reliability, less about mythology than trust. In a chaotic industry built on inconsistency, he gave people certainty. That idea transformed a poor orphan with £417 into the founder of one of the most powerful luxury alcohol brands in history. And maybe that is why this story still feels so different 2 centuries later. Because it was never really about whiskey. It was about vision strong enough to ignore ridicule, discipline strong enough to survive disaster, and the willingness to build something the world did not yet understand. So what do you think mattered more? John Walker's obsession with consistency, or his refusal to think like everyone else? And could a brand like this even be built in today's world? Subscribe for more stories like this.